Have you ever wondered if there is an easier way to launch and run a podcast without drawing in endless tasks? Today's guest, Arjun Sundararajan, thought the same, and he did something about it. As the founder of Zync AI, an all in one suite for podcast recording, production, and promotion, Arjun has made it his mission to streamline the entire podcasting process. Not only is he is a successful entrepreneur because he has done multiple startups before, but he has also had a podcast host himself. So if you're looking for tips on how to get your podcast up and running, this episode is packed with insights you don't want to miss. Welcome to another episode of Founders Podcast. I'm your host, Ash, and this is a show where I interview proven founders and industry experts who share their stories, strategies, and insights to help you build launch your business. So I hope you enjoy the show with Arjun. Arjun, welcome to the show.
Hey Ash, thanks for having me.
Do you have a favorite quote, something that inspires or motivates you would like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I don't know if this is a quote by a specific person, but the kind of the mantra that like typically runs in my head is happy yet hungry.
Mhm,
That's what I typically go with. And the kind of the reason behind that is often when we are founders, we tend to be thinking about like ambitious and like I need to be there, I need to be where I want to be. But I insist on that happy yet hungry part of it is to say that being having the feeling that like I'm enough where I am, I'm happy with what I have right now, but I'm still
mhm,
hungry to like be better, be more ambitious and like get more.
mhm,
And it has to come from a place of contentment and happiness rather than from a place of like desperation or like a fire under your ass kind of feeling. So that's the mantra that like keeps going in my head when I'm on a daily basis.
Great, great. That's the mantra which keeps you motivated and keeps you aligned with your goal. Good thought. Good thought. Arjun, tell us about Zinc. What does the product do? Who is it for? And what's the main problem you're helping to solve?
Yeah, absolutely. When I started out as a founder, I was a very product person, and I was mostly thinking about like, hey, what am I going to build as a product, and what am I going to like think as like the what is a product going to look like? Is what was the first thought when I was first starting out, and then I slowly
Mhm,
turned around to like think about like it's like, hey, what does the customer care about and everything? And this was like right before I launched my first startup. Like I
mhm,
turned around and like started thinking about the customer. But actually, now
mhm,
that I'm thinking about it, like the biggest thing that like as an early stage founder that one should be thinking about is like if I'm going to like take this, do I have an audience, or like who's going to like buy this product, and how am I going to build that audience way before I even build my product? So like
mhm,
building that target demographic and like sort of nurturing that has become a thing that like I'm recommending every early stage founder, or like even people who are want to start a company, to start thinking
mhm,
about. And so when it comes to that, like the big problem was that how do you get people to like take that customer discovery call? How are you going to like get people to like talk about it? And so one of the ways that I thought about when like I've seen many people do this is you launch a podcast, become a thought leader in this space, not necessarily launching podcast as a way for you to just launch a podcast, but
mhm,
essentially become the person who's building a brand around that specific area. uh,
mhm,
and the problem was that like when someone has to do something like that, and where they're creating a podcast or like they are starting to put thought leadership content out there, the amount of effort
mhm,
it takes to do all of that, you need to wear multiple hats, everything from like a video editor to like a social media marketer to a person who's doing research and like other people and like connecting and everything. There are some things that you might be a good at and you're an expert at, but for the most part you want to do what is good for your business, which is being the thought leader, building that brand around you. Everything else should not happen. And so that's kind of what like happened when we launched Zinc as a recording studio and a podcast platform, is that we take away all that work it takes to launch yourself as a thought leader, as a build your personal brand. So all you're
mhm,
doing is like showing up and like talking to people who are in your field every week or every day, and then that gets automatically converted into thought leadership content. This includes everything from uh, blog posts to web pages, and most importantly, short form video content, which is what is being consumed predominantly these days, is the main form
Mhm.
of content that everybody's consuming. So how
Mhm.
can you like take that and convert that into short form video content so that your thought leadership is growing across all the channels, whether it is like LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook, Instagram, depending on like whatever kind of business that you're running. So
Mhm.
Zync is like an one-stop shop for you to launch a podcast or launch your thought leadership, and be able to drive that with content, especially short form video content.
Got it. Got it. So it's not just like any other platforms. For example, we are currently using StreamYard where we're recording this podcast, but there are like River FM or platforms like where you can go jump on a window on a browser and then record your podcast. It is actually uh, a whole go to place shop for a podcaster where that podcaster not just create the content but also recreate them to reutilize at different platforms. Is that close enough, or maybe I'm
Exactly. So yeah, I think that's quite a good observation there.
Mhm.
There is a component of the recording studio which is very similar to Riverside FM or StreamYard, where you're doing pretty much the same thing. We add some
Mhm.
other elements to it as well, where you can make it a little bit more interactive. You can bring in live audience and everything else as well. So you can actually do exactly what you're doing over here in
Mhm.
those places, but it's pretty comparable. We also record like high definition video from all different angles so that we can create content. But then
Mhm.
the important part is what happens after that is when the show's over, we deliver a content kit which includes everything from like websites, long form video clips to short form bite-sized video clip formatted for like portrait, landscape, square, everything that is ready for you to go, and it's one click publishable to all these channels. And that's the part that otherwise someone has to either build an expertise in like video editing and spend hours on like editing every video, or they need to
Mhm.
like hire a video editor, and then they would actually have that all like done for them. So this is, we're using AI to automate that whole process of taking that pillar content of your interview and converting
Mhm.
that into all forms of micro content that can be distributed instantly across all channels.
Got it. Got it. And okay, so let's talk about the beginning. Where did the story begin? Where did the idea for Zing AI came from? What was happening in your mind at that time? And when you had this epiphany, did you looked into the market? And I'm sure you did. And there was plenty of other platforms, right? What was going on at that time? And what did you see from your research that encouraged you to move ahead with this idea?
Yeah, for sure. I ran a show before I launched this. So Zinc was mainly an what we were doing was like a larger event platform where we were able to host like bigger events. And then the
Mm-hmm.
more I was running events on that platform, like bringing in live audience, almost like webinar style, where I'm bringing in people. That's kind of like how we had like launched. And at some point of time, it like struck to me that the effect of having a live audience is pretty like you know you it's great to like bring in live audience and like have them question and everything, but like that's it. Like those 20 people who are watching it, that's all that they're going to be like watching it, or like that 50 people who are coming or 100 people who are like signing up, that's all the people that are going to be like getting this. We should
Mm-hmm.
reuse this content is kind of like where it all started. Like you know, it's like, and then so what we started doing was like recording it and then being able to, and this was times when the standard webinar platforms were not doing this before. Like this was like about 2 3 years back, like they were not. Now some of them have started doing these things as well. So that's kind of what like was the tipping point for us is I ended up hiring somebody to like take this video, and then like they would like put it in a video editor, and they would spend some time in like finding out the right clips, and then be able to like take that, extract that, and then like polish it, make it like nicer, and then be able to like publish it, schedule it, and all of those things. We saw like there is an opportunity over here. Like this process of end-to-end podcast production can be easily automated, and like we had already some ability to like record it live and then be able to like video edit it and create like these overlays and everything on top of it. So we figured like we might as well like stitch this all together into an end-to-end product, and that's kind of what started off with. I mean, that's what we started off with.
Did you had any pre-launch strategies in place? For example, like Elon Musk did sold out, I don't know, half of his Tesla trucks before even starting the factory. Did you implemented something like that to get the hold of your potential customers, or even just to understand if there is a market? Or I think the recent terminology in the startup space is going on something like blue ocean and red ocean, if that's
Yeah.
you're aware of. And then which side of the ocean you were in, and then if you found out that, what was the next step you took at that point of time?
Yeah. So the yeah, blue ocean, red ocean makes a lot of sense. I think it comes
Mhm.
from like the idea that like if you are a blue ocean company, you're going into uncharted territory, and like or areas where like people have not set foot. And then red ocean is where like you're going after like something that is well established, and you're like being another competitor in that space. um, I know that like podcasting platforms exist and there are like many different places, and so we actually went into like podcasting knowing that it's a little bit of a red ocean for sure, and we went into that. But we're carving out our own niche among that. Like, so there is podcasting platforms that are not doing some things with video editing. It's still like a separate process of downloading the video, dealing with MP4 files, and like hiring a video editor, multiple people working on this, coordinating, and all of those things that are happening. And so we know that there are some issues with the existing solutions out there, but those are more features. And I would imagine that like many of the other podcasting platforms will also start offering this sooner than later. So we have a blue ocean component as well in our product, which is to say that you could and we offer this as almost like a separate package or a product. We would say like it's called the Solo Studio, where you can imagine that as a spend 5 to 10 minutes every week, jump in as a solo, as a single person, not as a podcaster that's interviewing somebody, but like as a solo, and answer questions that your audience care about. And then we would take that, chop it, and like create video clips out of that. And this is not just like a solo podcast. This is where like you write a video script and we come up with the video script and everything else as well. So this Solo Studio concept is kind of us like going into more blue ocean, because there's not much uh, out there that does something like this. But at the same time, like red ocean is good in some ways, because you have like an established market, people understand the language, they know what to expect out of it, and it's easy to like go after those people as well.
Right. So you kind of like a overlay between the red and blue, because you kind of like trying to create a category, but then obviously you want to sort of like attract the customers which you are already in the blue ocean towards your category.
Yeah, and then we see some of both, right? Like there are people who come in thinking that they want to launch a podcast, and then they think about like, hey, I want to maybe like just start off with creating video content and just see how it is before I launch a podcast, to
Mhm.
get like a feel of it. And that's something that happens as well, where like people come in for the podcast studio, but then like try to like use the Solo Studio. And then the other way
Mm.
around also happens, where like people using Solo Studio are like thinking that like, it's like, oh, this is nice, I can actually like jump in and like create video, but what if I want to like use this as a way to like connect with other people and like launch a podcast for myself? And so that also happens. And so we see sort of this people going back and forth between these different experiences.
Got it. Got it. Okay. And I want to learn more about you as a person, and your history and the journey you have taken. But before we go into that, can you give us a sense of the business size of the business? Where are you in terms of number of people, number of customers, size of the team, etc.?
Yeah, for sure. I'd say like we're in this world, like there is this climate of like where fundraising is and everything. Like everybody is considered early stage, given like how it's all skewed at this point of time. I'd probably say we are like we would consider ourselves still early stage, still in like the early revenue, where we are trying to get to like the next stage. Our team is about like six of us, and we are sort of distributed across the world. I'm based here in Seattle, but like we have a very small team, but like very powerful team that we have. And We raised a pre-seed round earlier, a couple of years back, and we have a bit of runway. And with revenue coming in, we were like trying to like drive the runway a little bit longer before we find enough conviction to like raise a Series A.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Great. Okay, so Arjun, let's talk. So I'm eager to learn more about the person behind this venture, right? Can you take us back to your roots, share with our listeners, like, um, uh, sh- uh, about your upbringing, childhood? How did your early experiences shape your journey and eventually led you to become the visionary entrepreneur? And were there any sort of like key influences from your family or surrounding friends, like this Rich Dad Poor Dad book we all read at some point of time, right? And then did any of them had a significant role in shaping your entrepreneurial spirit?
Yeah, I starting from start, I grew up in India. I grew up in what I would consider as a very like average middle class household in India, I would say. And I had an upbringing which had absolutely no entrepreneurial touch points at all. So I did not think about an entrepreneurial journey for until like I was way later, like in probably in my mid 20s, I would say, when I started thinking about it. Absolute no idea. So was an engineer by training, a geek at heart, spent a lot of my time in like coding and like building software, just like building more and more like distributed like big companies. So I worked, um, did my master's in computer science, came to the US for doing that, and then I interned at Microsoft, and that was the only company that I interviewed right after, just joined directly right there. Spent about 7 8 years working at Microsoft. Again, like was part of like some of the big launches around like location-based services, maps. I was in that world for like some time, and so again, these are like products used by like millions, if not hundreds of millions of people across the world. And so building, I was a pure software engineer, product engineer in all of these orgs. And somewhere during that time is when like Windows Phone launched, and this was like way back when like Windows Phone was a thing. And at
Hmm.
that point of time, like everybody was like talking about like, hey, how can we build apps for this? And like the app ecosystem was picking up, and so I was very interested in like sort of building games and like building small apps and everything. And that we got together with a bunch of friends, started building this, and then I realized that like I knew shit about like running a company or like starting a business or like launching something. All I knew was how to code, and so that's when I decided that like okay, that's what I want to do. And so I one fine day like decided to like quit Microsoft, and I moved to San Francisco. I was in Seattle at that time, so I moved to San Francisco, and I moved to San Francisco and I worked in a smaller company. Again, I did not take like the plunge in starting a company right yet. I worked in a smaller company. It was a company called Foursquare. It's a small by Microsoft standards. It's still about like 100, 200 people company. And I worked there for like a couple of years, worked with like the founders of the company, learned a lot about like what it takes to like take a company from 0 to 1. Not so much about 0 to 1, but as much as like as early stage as it can get. And then I joined a friend of mine to be an entrepreneur in residence in this place called Stanford Research Institute, which is SRI, which is based in Menlo Park, which famously spun out software like Siri that was like taken by Apple. And so that's the lab where I was an EIR. So we spun out some voice technology, and then we spun out into a company, and I started my first startup over there, and I knew nothing. My friend was the CEO at that time, and I was the CTO. I was more playing the second rank there in terms of like not dealing with customers, just mostly like dealing with technology still. And I kind of saw everything from the ground up. What was fundraising like? What was it like to like go and like get customers? What was it like to like build a sales motion and everything around that?
Hmm.
And so then like fast forward, there was COVID. We ended up shutting down that product, and then when I launched Zinc, after like almost like 6 years or 7 years after I started my side project where I was working at Microsoft, I decided like, okay, now I'm like starting my own company. And then like I found a co-founder, I found a small set of people, and then we started building this. And so that's the journey. I'd say like the key pivotal moments, I would say, where like the inspiration about like the whole startup and the lean startup thing that was happening in the 2013 2014 part of it inspired me quite a bit. And that whole uh, side on the company, while I was working for the company, still be able to like moonlight and like build some apps on the side and launch them. That was also like big motivation to say that like, hey, I want to do this full time.
Got it. Got it. Cool. So you have a very good journey. I mean, entrepreneurs entrepreneurs face quite a lot of ups and downs, if you know what I mean, right? But your journey started quite well because you were you did your graduation, and then you started working with Microsoft, and then potentially you were in the space where it's very difficult to get out of that security mindset, right? I still remember when I was working, I thought it weeks and weeks every night that can I do it? Can I like go out of this comfortable zone and then potentially just work on my own and then just hustle around and and basically do the work of 10 people, isn't it? That's essentially the founders do in real world. It's not the glorified view of like yachts and cars and everything. You have to do quite a lot of isolated work, loneliness, and more than 12 hours a day, isn't it? If I'm not wrong.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like it's a very lonely journey, and I think like few people talk about like the mindset shift it takes to be there. Many people are
Mm,
shaped by fire, like you mentioned, where they come from like a, oh, I had this like really horrible problem that I was facing in my life, and that inspired me, demotivated me to start that or so. I would say like maybe that's fueling a lot of people. For me personally, like everything had to be like adjusted from like pushing yourself out of your comfort zone to do something that's sort of larger than yourself, and that's what like motivated me to do it. There's a lot of
mhm,
mindset shift, like as you said, like the hours that you have to do, like the support system, like your family and what you do, how you deal with money and how you think about money makes a big difference. Because sometimes you think like, oh my god, I could be working at Microsoft and making like millions of dollars at this point of time, and like when I'm doing a startup, like there's just so much in the air. And like so there's just like so many of these things, and how you shape your mindset is where it is. And again, like this is why I mentioned that mantra. Like I always am operating from a place of happiness or contentment, where I say that like I'm happy where I am. Like it's like this day, if these things work out, it's amazing, and I will always fight and serve to do all of these things. But like I'm happy, I'm like I'm enough for where it is. And like that took a while to get to that place, because you're otherwise desperate, you're like kind of like getting into like the stress part of it. And I'm when my first startup, I did like the 12-hour shifts and everything. Now I'm a parent. I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I value my time with them as well. And like, while I do spend more time than like a normal person would on like startup plan, I'm not doing that like crazy 12-hour, 13-hour every day. Some days are like that, but like on a daily basis, it's never like that for me. I think like that balance has come about. Like the roller coasters have become a little bit more mellow for me right now, I would say.
got it. Got it. Yeah. 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 And I've got a couple of podcast related questions, if that works with you. Is
Yeah,
that okay?
please.
Yeah. Yeah. So in your experience then, what are the essential ingredients for launching a successful podcast?
Yeah, I think for someone who's launching a podcast, it's about thinking on like what is the goal for your podcast. I think, and that's very important for people to start with that. Uh, if you are an early stage founder thinking about starting a podcast as a way to like establish yourself as a thought leader and build the connections, that's a very different podcast. If you are an established business using this as a lead generation channel, using this as a way to open doors, that's a very different thing. I'd say like the main ingredient that goes into like podcast making is understanding the ultimate goal you want to do with it, and then like shaping your podcast to like match that. um,
Mm,
and and the second thing is like a good understanding of like your audience. For the most part, you need to start thinking about like the three people or three sets of people. One is like yourself, what matters to you, what are areas and topics that you are most interested in and that you would like endlessly spend time thinking about, talking about, and like you need to like align that with what your interest is, and you're like the first audience, I would say. And then the person who you're bringing in as guests, how does this resonate with them, and like how can you actually like make it so you're having a great conversation, bringing out the best in each other, setting each other up for success. And so that part of it is very important. And then I would say is like the your like wider audience. And I'm not saying that your wider audience are like third or like not less important, but unless you get the first two things right, you're never going to serve your audience really well. And so you need to like start thinking about these first two things before you start thinking about it. And then having a pulse of your audience, who are they, why are they listening to this, what are they getting out of this, and everything is important as well. And so like the knowing your goal, and then like knowing your audience is like, I would say, like the main part of it. Everything else is about taking a very experimental, whether like you're choosing a format of like it's um you want to do 20-minute videos, whether you want to do it as like a group session, or like you want to do it one-on-one, or like whether you want to release it on like one day or the other day. Everything is an experiment, and that mindset that like this is an like everything is an experiment is super helpful. Like so it like takes away the pressure of you to like start something or do something, and you go on with it thinking that I'm going to do this for like a few weeks, and then if this works out, I'm going to take what works out, and then I'm going to change the process. And so that's a big mindset shift of experiment. And then the last one I would say is that you want to think about this as a system rather than a goal that you're trying to achieve. Like if you're trying to say that I want this, while I do think about this as a goal, like I want to like do customer discovery with this. Your metrics should be more on the input, where you're thinking that like I'm going to publish like one episode every week for the next 6 months. That's what my goal is, rather than like I'm going to try and get 10 customers through this channel. Is like a very very unrealistic goal, or like not having. And it's also going to like often lead to disappointment if you are starting to think about this as a marketing channel that's going to give you return on investment reliably in the early days. I think that's the way that I would say like, these are the most important things that you need to think about while you're before you launch a podcast. I hope that answered your question.
No, no, it does, and it gave us a couple of solid golden nuggets, because the moment you understand that obviously you're doing uh, the podcast for a reason, but it's more about the system. Just exactly like when you go in startup world, yes, your idea matters, but the execution is what holds 90% of the weightage. So that was a good one. So just following on to this question then, what or how can podcasts attract and grow their audience in an increasingly crowded space?
Yeah, I think if you have to launch a podcast now, there's a few things to keep in mind. I would say is like niche down. This is true for startups. This is true for podcast as well. Like you need to treat your podcast as almost it's a product that you're launching. um,
Mhm.
you need to niche down, and you need to think about a small set of people, like the inch wide mile deep. Like that's kind of like what you need to think about as to how you're going to like. So if you are like launching a software development product, or like you would rather better off if you started treating like, hey, these are cybersecurity developers who are in the east coast of the US, and that's like what my podcast is going to target. You get like a lot more like very very like go even niche than that, like depending on like who it is. So just niche down, so it goes to like the exact expertise you were talking about, and then you can think about expanding it if it gets much more popular at that point of time. But niching down is like one of the primary things that I would say is an essential thing. And then the second thing is that you are guaranteed that most of the people who are going to listen to your podcast are never going to listen to the whole episode. And this is like the reality that I learned the hard way in some ways, where I was expecting that, like, oh man, there's going to be like a lot of people listening to this podcast, but it doesn't happen like that. So what is important for you is like repurpose everything. When you have a podcast, you need to like be able to take that and like distribute it in ways that your audience will consume, like get as much mileage out of that. So the whole like pillar content, micro content strategy of like using your podcast to convert it into like short form video clips or blog posts or newsletters, and everything that you need to do, you got to do it. Like milk that SEO juice out of that, and then be able to like use the network of your guest, and then like leverage that. So all that is like a really essential way. And then I would say like that whole being consistent, right? Like you don't want to, you're not gonna, it's all about compounding. It's like building a muscle, I would say. Like the first day you go to the gym, you're like gonna flex your muscle, you're gonna see nothing. But then like you do this every week and like someday you're gonna like see a difference. You never know where it happened, but it's just going to happen along the line. But it's about that reps, it's about like being consistently doing that, and that's like really important as well. And so
Yeah.
that's why I said the goal should be more on the input, is saying that like commit to posting one video, one episode a week for the next 6 months, irrespective of the results, and then see where it goes.
Definitely, and definitely, and I can vouch for it because when I started, I was sitting in Shordik with another founder with my phone, and we were just using the voice memo app for the podcast recording. Can you imagine that? It
Right.
was terrible. And then now it's like more like 6 seasons. We are already finishing up our seventh season. So never had the goal of like making or generating leads from this. It was all about connections, talking to interesting people like yourself, and that's where it got us here. Great. And the last question on the podcast side is, and it's my personal favorite because I do quite a lot of put a lot of effort on creating these podcasts, and it takes so much time. So what strategies do you recommend for saving time? And this is so crucial. So while still maintaining the quality in podcast production.
Yeah, I think like we can easily fall in the perfectionist trap of like trying to tweak everything and be picture perfect, is like, oh, I'm a person with high taste and I need to release only like a good quality podcast or like so. Um, it's taken me a while to like get used to that, but I would probably say is if it's 80% good, ship it, like get it out there. And that's probably like the mantra that I had. And like that's one mindset shift that you need to go through before you can you know because if you don't do that, what's going to happen is you're going to spend way much more time, and then like you are going to not enjoy doing it, especially if you're spending time on things that you're not good at, like like video editing or like something that is to do with like audio tweaking or adding some nice clips or something like that. Like you're not going to like enjoy that whole process. So I think like saving time is like the first thing, is like getting into 80% good is there. There's obviously like a ton of AI tools that exist right now that makes your job simple for like a lot of these processes, like transcript, converting them into like blog posts and converting that. Use them liberally. Like, of course, there are going to be like places where they're lacking, and so you have to like tweak it. But it's better to like go off of a first draft and then tweak it than to like start from scratch and say that you're going to like write up about this or so. So I'd say like liberally use AI. That saves you a ton of time. And then there are automation. This is kind of what like Zync is trying to drive at, is automate like the entire flow and like be okay with like an existing system, right? Like, so I'm going to bring a guest, do a prep call, like that's going to be 15 minutes, that notes goes over here, that goes into my speaking points, that goes into questions, and then that gets published over here. So like that system that you built, in the initial days it's going to take for a while for you to like tweak that system, and you need to obviously iterate on it and improve on it or so, but just like have a system in place and like get that thing going. And Zinc basically, like the idea is that like it gives you that system, end-to-end system, so you're not going to think about anything else, everything is taken care of for you. But if you're doing it on your own, like just build a system. It's going to take a while, but once you get that system going, then you're going to feel like comfortable in like doing that week over week. So say these are like the big tips. If you have the money and if you want to like do this for your company or so, it's okay to even like hire a person who's a producer for you, who would take care of all of these things, bringing in guests and being able to edit it. And so you're thinking about like 3 4 personas. You could find one person who might be able to do all of these things, someone who would research and like bring the guest speakers, and someone who would like help you prep the notes for it, and then someone who would like edit your video, and then someone who would like distribute it, the social media marketer that would like help distribute this. So it's wonderful if you want to do all of these things, but like you could use help if you have the resources for it.
Got it. Got it. Great stuff. And while we were talking, I jotted down some doodles. So I would like to, show you that, and then potentially we can reiterate through what we have spoken about. So you mentioned at the start that you were a product man, right? You were always thinking about product, product, product. And eventually in the process, you realize that, okay, instead of focusing on product, initially you should be focusing on the customer and what customer wants. Would you be able to elaborate a little bit more about that? Because I think our listeners will benefit more on this particular point, because this is very crucial.
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked. Yesterday, I was at like a networking event over here, and I met with like some. I mean, it was a big crowd of like few hundred like founders, and I just met with like probably like 20, 30 people over there, and like very early stage founders. Most of them, when I asked them like, "Hey, where are you in your journey?" I'm
Mm,
just starting out. I'm just building a product, and I'm like, "Okay, so who are your customers, and like who are the people who are there?" Oh, I'm gonna finish building the product is kind of the mindset
mm,
that they have, and we are like now in 2024, and like there are people
mm,
still like in their mindset. So for me, what has now become obvious is still not obvious to people. So I think it's worth talking about is that I'd probably think customers first in that like what is the problem that you're trying to solve for these people, and
mm,
it's one thing to like just assume what you're solving for these people, but like another thing, and I'm guilty of like not doing this even for my current startup, is like starting to build that go to market motion. How are you going to like get acquire like that first 100 customers, 200 customers? I wish I had done that even for my for this startup, and like I still was like, while I cared about what customers want and I like talked to like a lot of them and I did this, I didn't have a reliable way to like go to market with a product when I started
mm,
out. So I would say like that understanding like what channels and what go to market strategy will make sense for you and like what will work for you, and um and then the product is like it'll eventually happen. It will happen once you're doing that, unless you're
mm,
building something like extremely groundbreaking, like the next AI which doesn't exist or so. Then it's okay for you to like spend like a year or two in like product with even before you think about customers, because you're doing something groundbreaking. But 95% of the product startups that are there out there are not like building any groundbreaking product or technology. They're mostly like building solving a problem of users. So it's better to start there. What problem are
mm,
you starting for users? So where what customers want, and then how are you going to like reach these people in mass, because that's becoming so much more harder these days, the go to market. And if you are pitching to investors, that's what they ask first right now, like, you know,
mm.
how are you going to how are you going to market with this product?
Mm-hmm. Got it. Got it. Perfect. So, go to market strategies should be the primary focus for any founders before even thinking about the product development or design or whatever it comes with the product side of it. Great stuff. And then the second part I have doodled around here is about growing your podcast. And in this diagram, I wanted to focus on podcast as a content, and the things you mentioned about, like, when you generate a piece of content, you should always use or try to reutilize the same and get most return on investment on that particular piece of content. Would you be able to elaborate on that part so that our listeners can understand it better?
Absolutely. I think Gary Vee famously like talked about this pillar strategy of like pillar content, micro content. I'm kind of paraphrasing what he said, but like this has become the mantra of like most marketers these days. Is when you record a video like this conversation that we're having over here, you're getting what is like the raw uh, output of this, which is basically a video of
Hmm.
this recording, and that's what like your pillar content is. And now
Yeah.
how can you like take this and repurpose this into like many different types of content, and then distribute it across different networks, and then for different audience? So imagine that like we take this video and like have the whole video available on YouTube. That's obvious, you do that.
Mm,
Or on available the audio of this available on Spotify, Apple Podcast. That's obvious, you most people understand this. But can you take interesting moments that happen from here and convert that
mm.
into like short form video clips, and like start distributing that in YouTube Shorts, or like Instagram Reels, or TikTok, or LinkedIn, which is now doubling down on video content? Can you like
Yeah.
start doing? How
Mm,
can you write an interesting post out of that which is has the right hook? The
mm,
that's like really important. Can you convert like moments of this into like carousels or like sort of image footage that will then be able to then use it on LinkedIn or like other more photo friendly like social media like Instagram. How can you do that? So there's all these aspects of repurposing content that makes absolute sense. And then
Mm,
you're also like talking about like a website. Can you take this post, convert it into almost like a blog post, put that into a website, into your website with the video embedded in that, and then tweak it so it's talking the obviously your conversation is around the SEO keywords that you care about. Like, can you actually like design it so that it automatically like optimizes it for SEO, and then you're able
mm,
to like have that be available on your website. Um, all these things are ways in which you can redistribute it. Newsletters, you send newsletters, you have a newsletter or start a newsletter and like just send your podcast essential highlights of this in your newsletter. That's like another way of like distributing it. And
mm,
much of this can be automated. And that's kind of what we do with Zync. We create this entire content kit and then it's like one click published to all of these channels. And
mm,
that's the big thing that people they leave value at the table when they're not repurposing this content.
mm. Got it. Got it. I am going to try Zinc.
Yeah,
For sure,
awesome.
because you know it's it solves so many problems for me that I've been facing. I mean, the amount of work I put in to just edit one single video and then get highlights from it to put it on LinkedIn is way more than what I can just get out of Zinc with and this automation. So I'm definitely going to try it. So you got a customer potentially here. Great stuff.
Absolutely.
So,
Happy to
yeah,
set up space. And I typically do this many shows that I go on. Like I end up like sort of doing another show on like the Zinc platform, like with a smaller show. And like, I'm happy to like set it up so I can be your first guest.
awesome. Perfect. That sounds good. Great. So let's go back so to our usual interview questions then. I am enjoying this conversation so much, Arjun, but we are limited of time. So before we jump on to our quick fire questions, I would like to ask you a personal question, if you don't mind. Throughout your journey and experience, there must have been some valuable lessons learned, right? If you don't mind sharing, could you reflect on your experience and tell us about one mistake or a setback that you encountered along the way, and that you now consider not really a regret but a lesson learned. And additionally, what advice would you give our listeners based on that experience?
Yeah, I'm probably we've touched upon some of those things already in that it's I'll probably highlight like a few of these that we already touched upon. One of which is that not thinking about the go to market ahead of like starting is like one of the big mistakes in like this that I wish I didn't do earlier. Building some thought leadership and audience around this is another mistake that I would say like people should not do when they're starting another company. So that's one of the things that I would say. One thing that we probably did not mention, and I would want to double click on, is the first co-founders and the people that you bring in is going to like essentially make your life amazing or miserable. So you have to like be very clear about the first set of people that are going to be in your startup. And I had like my like when I first started out, like my first startup, like the whole vibe with my co-founder was not great, and I think like because of that I did not enjoy my first startup experience as much. And not to say that like either of us were right or wrong, we're still good friends right now and everything, but like it just did not gel well. Like we did not
Mm,
go well. So I would treat this almost as like a dating process. Like you want to like spend enough time knowing each other, and everything that goes in like the dating analogy goes over here. Like how can you be vulnerable, not let your egos come in the way, and how can you be able to like talk to them as if you are they are just an extension of yourself. If you find those kind of people and like who also have complementary skill sets, most of the time you rub shoulders with people who are exactly the same kind of people as you are. But for like you to like launch a startup, being able to find somebody with like a complementary skill set, like you could be like a great developer and that person could be like a great salesperson, or like vice versa. If you have complementary skill sets, that's amazing. And so spending that effort in that. I would say, like, I don't know if I could have learned it in a better way, but like I had to go through that and like suffer it in a little bit before I realized how important that was. um so that, I would say, was like a very big takeaway for me in my startup journey, is like the kind of people that you bring in.
Interesting. I think I've interviewed quite a lot of founders, and a good percentage of founders could relate to that because they have talked about this particular challenge during the founder's journey. Great. Well, thanks for the advice. We should wrap up now. We should get going into our lightning round. So I've got six quick fire questions for you, so you can answer them as quickly as possible. You ready?
Okay, let's go.
Great. What's the top three strategies to generate leads in 2024?
Social selling, um inbound content, short form video content. um the third one I would have to say is LinkedIn outbound marketing.
LinkedIn outbound. Yeah. These are all the threes were mentioned multiple times by multiple people on different platforms. So I kind of agree with this one. What book would you recommend to our audience and why?
Uh, I I think there are two books that I would say. One is the Founder Brand. This is by Dave Gerhardt. This is talking about like making yourself a brand, and the reason why I say that is like that shaped how I think about a founder and their journey. You're no more like that person who's like behind, who's doing this. You're building trust with your audience, and you need to be upfront, and like your brand needs to like come through, and that's going to help with your company's brand as well. So that's a good book, Dave Gerhardt's Founder Brand. And then the other book I would say is like Atomic Habits. I'm a very big habit geek. I spend a lot of time thinking about habits and routines and mindsets and shifts and everything. So I would say like the book Atomic Habits shaped quite a bit of how you do system level thinking in your everyday, like when you're building a startup, or whether it is in your everyday, how you manage life outside. So that way you get like your bandwidth for doing your startup. Everything was shaped by Atomic Habits. Essentially, get
Yeah.
better 1% every day. So, and let it compound.
I've read Atomic Habit quite a long back ago. I think it's James Clear. I
James
think
Clear,
they're right.
yes.
Great. What one attribute or characteristic in your mind of a successful founder?
Oh, this changes by the week. I'd probably say resilience. It's a bit lonely roller coaster kind of journey. So resilience is probably one of the most important attribute, I would say.
Great. What's your favorite personal productivity tool or habit?
I have a ton, and I don't want to. This is a area that I would say a lot on. I'd say Todoist is an app that I use quite a bit, and for managing tasks and everyday habits or so. So I would probably say Todoist.
Great. What's a new or a crazy business idea you would like to pursue if you had time?
Oh, I've had a lot of crazy ideas. One of that is basically um, a game style way for people to learn soft skills, everything from like entrepreneurship to um, emotional intelligence to like becoming better at interpersonal relationships and everything along those lines. But done in a way where you're just playing a game every week or every day. uh, uh, when I say game, it's not like a computer game or like a video game or something, but like a it's
Something
done in
along
a
the
way that
lines
is
of
fun, something along those lines.
Duolingo.
Kind of like that, yeah. Duolingo, or like maybe it might involve like real world and like practical things that you may have to do in the real world as well, but like could be but it's a lot more based on like sort of fun drills and points and mechanisms and gamifying that have that part, and eventually like slowly shaping your way into becoming an that entrepreneur that you are, or whatever it is. I don't know
Mhm.
if it's that unique an idea. Perhaps maybe there are already some things that exist. I've not done much research, but this is a crazy idea that I want to follow someday.
I like it. I like it. I think it has a potential.
Yeah,
Cool.
thank you.
And last but not least, what's an interesting or a fun fact about you that most people don't know?
I think I've already said about like me being a habit geek. This is the most recent fun fact about me. I just set myself to like memorize the whole Bhagavad Gita, which is the Hindu thing, and I said that nobody has the time for doing that. So, and I thought like, what if I had like built a system around it? And like, I'm kind of like 5%, 10% into it or so, and I do this where I spend only like 5 to 10 minutes a day in doing it, and I'm along the journey. So this is a fun fact about me: is like I take up some silly projects like these and I continue doing them and I keep building it. I have a huge backlog of habits that I would build that I keep iterating on every day.
Awesome. I like it. Something like that I have to do because that keeps you motivated. And then obviously you can add your morning rituals around them. So it's really good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Arjun, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story, unpacking the last years of building this business and some of the ups and downs along the way. If people want to check out Zing and if they want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do it?
Yeah, LinkedIn works best. Connect with me. My name is Arjun Sundararajan. I'm sure we can put in the LinkedIn link along with this episode. But if you want to email me, Arjun, Arjun at zinc.zy.ai is another great way to connect with me.
Great stuff. Arjun, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your inspiring journey and the impactful work you're doing through Zinc. And it's been an absolute pleasure having you on Founders Podcast.
Thanks, Ash. Thanks for having me.
Thank you all for tuning into this episode of Founders Podcast. I hope you found our conversation with Arjun insightful and inspiring. If you're a founder or an industry expert interested in sharing your story on our podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out. Please reach out to Arjun on arjun at zinc.ai and get in touch and get your podcast moved to Zinc and produce lots and lots of short form video content. I'm going to do that myself. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to our podcast and stay updated for future interviews. Stay inspired, stay motivated, and keep building.